Opposition to the Nazis between 1933 and 1939, though present, was fragmented and ultimately ineffectual in halting the regime's rise. Among the most notable sources of resistance were the political left, elements within the church, and various youth movements, each driven by different motivations but all facing immense challenges in a state that ruthlessly suppressed dissent. The political left, including communists and social democrats, had been vehemently opposed to Hitler and the Nazis from the outset. However, their ability to mount an effective resistance was severely compromised by their divisions and the swift and brutal crackdown by the Nazi regime. The Communist Party, KPD, and the Social Democratic Party, SPD, were natural enemies of the Nazis, advocating for socialist and workers' rights, in stark contrast to Hitler's nationalist and fascist vision. However, these two left-wing factions were deeply divided, both ideologically and tactically. The KPD, following directives from Moscow, viewed the SPD as a greater threat than the Nazis in some respects, branding them as social fascists due to their support for the Weimar Republic. This ideological rift prevented any unified front from forming against Hitler. When the Nazis seized power, they moved quickly to crush the political left. The Reichstag fire in February 1933 was blamed on communists, providing Hitler with the pretext to arrest thousands of KPD members and ban the party. The SPD, though initially attempting to resist, was also outlawed, and its members were similarly persecuted. Many were imprisoned, tortured, or forced into exile, while those who remained in Germany were driven underground. Despite these efforts, the left was largely unable to mount an effective resistance due to their weakened state, lack of coordination, and the pervasive fear instilled by the Gestapo. Some members of the Christian churches also opposed the Nazi regime, though their opposition was often more moral than political. Among the Catholic Church, opposition centered around the regime's policies that violated Christian teachings, particularly in areas such as eugenics and the persecution of Jews. Figures like Cardinal Clemens von Galen openly condemned the Nazi euthanasia program, which targeted the disabled and mentally ill, and his sermons reached a wide audience despite the regime's attempts to silence him. Similarly, within the Protestant Church, the Confessing Church movement, led by pastors like Martin Niemöller and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, stood against the Nazi effort to control religious life. The Confessing Church rejected the Reich Church and its pro-Nazi German Christians, insisting on the independence of Christian doctrine from Nazi ideology. This resistance led to severe repercussions, with Niemöller being imprisoned in a concentration camp and Bonhoeffer eventually being executed for his involvement in plots against Hitler. Despite their courage, the church-based opposition was limited in scope and did not significantly threaten the Nazi hold on power, largely because it lacked the broader popular support and organization needed to do so. Youth opposition to the Nazis also emerged, particularly through groups like the Edelweiss Pirates and the Swing Kids. These movements were composed mostly of teenagers and young adults who rejected the strict regimentation and ideological indoctrination of the Hitler Youth, which was the official youth organization of the Nazi Party. The Edelweiss Pirates, who were active in working-class districts, were known for their defiant attitudes, distinctive badges, and songs that mocked the Hitler Youth and Nazi officials. They engaged in acts of petty sabotage, such as disrupting Nazi parades, spreading anti-Nazi leaflets, and offering shelter to deserters from the military. The Swing Kids, on the other hand, were mostly middle-class youths who embraced American jazz and swing music, which was condemned by the Nazis as degenerate. By gathering in underground clubs to dance and listen to band music, they openly flouted the regime's cultural policies and the rigid social norms imposed by the Nazis. While these youth movements were more focused on cultural resistance than direct political action, they represented a form of rebellion against the oppressive conformity demanded by the Nazi state. Despite these pockets of resistance, the overall opposition to the Nazis was limited in its impact. The regime's extensive use of propaganda, combined with its ruthless suppression of dissent, ensured that most opposition was either crushed or driven underground. The political left was too divided and weakened to pose a serious challenge. The Church's opposition was largely moral and lacked broad support, and the youth movements, though defiant, were small and lacked the means to effect real change. By the late 1930s, the Nazi regime had solidified its control over Germany, and the various strands of opposition remained fragmented and isolated, unable to prevent the country from descending further into totalitarianism and ultimately war.